click everything. Nice. There we go. Yep. So we've got people joining. Hi, Ron. Hi, Ron.
Yeah, we already have a lot of people in the waiting to join in, so that's really cool.
Yep.
But yeah, back of the session, we already had our introductions done, but we might need to do them again for attendees. So I think we can just get started right away, right? Because we're already running 1 minute late, so might as well do a quick introduction for our attendees today. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today. I know people are still joining in. I'm Pratim Bhosale, developer advocate at Treblle, and this is webinar number 2 of our series around understanding the anatomy of an API, the report that Treblle brought out, and just understanding why do APIs seem so complicated in the enterprise world. And today with me, I have 2 speakers. One of them is a troublemaker. Sorry, I meant a treble maker. And one of them has been in the API industry for more than 15 years. So both of them, it's going to be interesting talking to them. I'm going to be on the learning side. And I'd first like to know from Kin about what he does. Like, I know everyone knows, but from his perspective. Hi, Kin. Welcome to the webinar, and would love to know a little bit more.
Yeah, no, happy to share. Kin Lane, API Evangelist. I'm been studying the world of APIs for quite a while now, but originally I'm a database guy, so back-end databases through the 80s and 90s. Kind of date myself a little bit there. But service-oriented architecture, early part of this century, and then by 2008, I was watching what's happening with mobile apps, the cloud, and REST, and kind of HTTP APIs, we'll say, and just started studying it, and that's led me to start a blog called API Evangelist, which has always been the vehicle for me understanding this world. And then I end up working with a lot of enterprises, government agencies, standards bodies on APIs. Recently, I did 4 years at Postman as their chief evangelist and running their open technologies group. And then I wanted to get my hands dirty and understand something, an intersection that kept coming up in the podcast that I was doing, Breaking Changes at Postman. Kept hearing folks talk about governance of APIs in the sprawl, and then how do we get more alignment with business and product when it comes to these efforts. And so I just spent the last year getting my hands dirty, understanding that at scale, the realities of it at Bloomberg. And now I'm back to API Evangelist, working with other enterprises doing the same.
That's pretty amazing. I will pick your brains a lot in different domains that you just explained. But before that, I'd like to hear from my manager and the CEO.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Just maybe a quick question for Kin. What was the database that you guys started with, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, it was cool. It's fine. It was a COBOL database,
Oh,
and my
really?
first task was to upgrade it to a Fox Pro
Okay.
database from COBOL. So.
Okay. Interesting. Nice. Okay, cool. So thanks, Pratim, for that great intro. Hi, everyone. My name is Vedran. I'm the founder and CEO of Treblle. Before being what I am now, I did have a slightly different life. I come from an engineering background. This is my second company. I founded my first one about 10 years ago. Spent similar to Kin around 10 years in the API space, been building websites, mobile apps, APIs for folks all around the place. And, when I started in 2011, nobody even knew what an API was. Nobody was asking about an API. Then that started shifting, and I guess it culminated based on everything that I saw probably in 2019 when, all the projects that we were doing were API based. And that's where I think we noticed a lot of problems, which we're going to talk about today, and we started this mission to try to help people solve them. So yeah, you can take it over for now.
Absolutely. A little bit about Treblle, just to let everyone know what we at Treblle do. We are basically a suite of products under observability and security for APIs. We make sure that enterprise APIs and all APIs that you're using in building your applications are secure and give you the right analytics that are required to make sure you don't come across like last minute issues or any any oops moments that we're seeing currently happening with the big companies with exposed collections and data and all of that. That's the major goal of the product, to make sure that you don't have to worry about governance and observability while it's so important, but you can focus on logic. I'm pretty sure Vedran will give a way better outlook at this, but I hope I've done somewhat of a good job here. I want to actually start with Kin and Vedran, like talking about how I've seen both of you talk about your experiences when you joined the API world. For me, it's been around 4 years that I was been in the API industry. When I joined as an API developer, APIs were pretty common. Like everyone was using APIs, specifically in banks. I started in a Swiss bank, and everything was given to me. Like I had to just follow specs. I had to follow everything. And then I recently like read your blog in where you mentioned that for the last 15 years, nothing has really changed in APIs. Like everything is the same. And when I'm listening to Vedran, he mentioned that there people didn't know a lot about APIs when he started out. How has the whole ecosystem changed or looked like in 15 years? If you can give a quick brief, or like if you have an idea about that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have strong opinions about, I mean, incremental changes have occurred and there's things, but I still go into enterprise organizations that are asking the same questions in as 2010 and 11. They're doing APIs. They don't know much about gateways, how to see those APIs. They don't really see much difference between how they're used with partners. They're afraid of it being publicly available when most of the time they already are. And so a lot of those conversations really haven't shifted. I would say the things that have changed is the application surface area. I mean, we went desktop, web, mobile devices. Now we got this AI going on, but that's always been there. You know, the AI and the bot and the voice and automation has always been part of the equation. So we just have a much larger application surface area. Got a lot more concerns about sprawl and how do we pay for this and where the revenue's coming from. And so the productization, how do we make the money? But then the stuff is powering already existing businesses. We've just been responding to business use case after business use case and building this sprawl. So there's just not a lot of accounting and ledger, you know, good ledger on how are we making money with all this? And now that's really coming down for a lot of organizations, is just 15 years of API sprawl, or 25 years to be honest, and SOA sprawl uh coming due. But then also just it keeps growing exponentially to power these different applications, and we've seen that with AI. And so the things that have really changed is we need to justify the spend. We need to make more money. We need to be more efficient. And so people are worried about governance and products is really kind of the top thing that people I'm talking to are worried about.
Interesting. From what I basically get from what you're saying is like education hasn't really changed, and things have been adding on top of one to the other. But education and faster access to whatever we've been improving on the tech side hasn't changed. Vedran, what do you think about that? Like,
I mean, I largely agree with a lot of the stuff that Kin said. I think, and I made this comment already when I originally started. You know, it was like Kin said, the age of mobile apps, right? So people were only thinking of APIs in that context. How do we essentially build something that will enable us to build on a mobile app? And I feel like this is some kind of it's been a pattern with the API space. Like every time APIs have been behind some big shift, right? So for example, mobile, everybody talked about mobile, nobody talked about APIs. Then nowadays you've got AI, again, still predominantly driven by APIs. Yet again, nobody talks about APIs. They all talk about AI. I think Kin mentioned one very interesting thing is the shift with devices. Again, you've got all of these new platforms that don't maybe necessarily even have screens. Like you've got wearables that have no screens. You've got AI devices that you can wear that you don't have a screen. All of those are on API. Yet again, slightly to what's weird, nobody still talks about APIs, and I think that's something that maybe on track with what Kin said when it comes to education. People have been learning all of these technologies, but they never actually stopped and said, "Hey, we actually got to learn the underlying thing that's powering all of these and make sure that we do them good."
Well said. Well said.
I also feel one of the reasons, like when I look at the new folks, where everyone's trying to ride the new wave and talk about the current trends, is because API is like at the structure of how communication is working between these apps and data. It doesn't seem very cool and the most trendiest thing to talk about, right? Like there's a new AI, like there's a new LLM that comes out, or there's a new algorithm that comes out. That's like super interesting, very hard to understand, a heavy jargon to talk about, at least when I look out in terms of technologies. But API, as you mentioned, it's been there for 15 days. We have like a very strong base and pillar, but that's why it's everybody just thinks, okay, this is something that's old, so it should just work out of the box. I don't need to take care of this. There isn't any innovation around that area. Do you think anything on that terms, Kin?
Yeah, I mean, think of APIs now as like electricity. It'll continue being very, very boring. And there'll be just certain groups of people who go geek out about it. And I've been to some of those energy circles, energy conferences, and where people talk about OAuth scopes for your solar panels and things
Oh
like that.
wow.
So really boring places. You know, you can go to like Utah for a 1 week conference and talk about energy and so think of APIs as like electricity. I mean, it's got to work. It's created entirely new markets. It continues to create new markets, but no one really talks about electricity unless it's a new market kind of thing, you know, solar, wind, you know, but having consistent plugs, well, I mean, there's not standardization globally all around the world, but there is a lot of standardization why power lines are under the ground and not strung all over the city willy-nilly all over the place. There's reasons. And we've gotten past the cool stage of APIs. If you're looking to be a dev advocate or someone who's wants that limelight, those days are over. You'll get like 8 seconds with each new wave, but yeah, it's done.
Couldn't agree more, but luckily, I think that when you dig deeper under everything that we just said, still people are very much, and this is something that we're going to talk about next, is very much building a large, large amount of APIs. And Pratim will lead us into the topic, but yeah.
Um, Absolutely. I think coming back to your analogy, Kin, when you said APIs is like electricity, that's what's needed for businesses to run. Like literally, electricity is what you need physical companies to run. Electricity is what we need to run for this thing to run. Similarly, like on a scale enterprise to run applications successful, you need APIs. You need the whole API landscape to like seamlessly run. And I think that is one domain where no matter how boring it looks, it is the part which affects the business the most. If your API structure, this is how I look at it, like how I have learned from it. Like if your API structure isn't strong enough, your policies around how you're building your APIs are not strong enough, then it's a crumbling enterprise. Do you agree, Ken
Yeah.
and Vedran?
Yeah.
Look, I think one recent example where I can think that resonates with a lot of people about the importance of APIs. Like there's this I don't want to plug any particular service, but there was a service that got really popular. It's an AI based code generator, and all of a sudden it stopped working, right? And the problem that happened was GitHub throttled their API requests, right? So essentially that entire product didn't work for, I don't know, a couple of hours or days. Doesn't really matter because of API throttling. But yeah, definitely agree.
Well, I do exercises fairly regularly where I'll turn on Charles proxy on my computer and I'll run my mobile traffic as well as my laptop through Charles proxy and I'll leave it on for 24 or 48 hours. And there's some sites it'll crash because you got to pin an SSL certificate. So security is a little locked down. There's a couple, I won't mention names, but most you can use a self-signed certificate and do this. And I make roughly 20,000 API calls a day as an individual, as a professional. And so I try to help people see that is like those little icons on your phone, those dashboards, everything you do for as part of your work, that's all APIs behind the scenes. And you're making 10 to 20, 30,000 calls a day. And so that's pretty critical that all that's there and it's continuing to evolve and someone's taking care of it and it's consistent and all that good stuff.
Yep.
Talking about like hitting 20,000 API requests every day, we've all seen a fact. We recently had a report that was launched named as Anatomy of an API, and one of the observations made through the report, based on like real data, was that most of the enterprise level organizations have over like 1,000 APIs in a single org, or sometimes even under different businesses that they have. And either they are public, they're private, and then there's this whole concept of like, how do you discover these APIs internally as well and externally as well? It's if it's an API first product, then for your customers, how do you externally access them? What is the complete pipeline that you create? And we realized, and what we saw was, this is where API first products and enterprises were struggling with discoverability and integration on different levels. And I think this is very similar to what I read in your short snippet about what you've been talking to enterprise customers and like enterprise companies overall. Why do you think like people are like still struggling if they're building so many APIs, and what's this really the issue there?
They're hard to see. They're digital. And so how do you see an API? I mean, we can throw out observability, documentation makes it visible, clients, playgrounds, sandboxes. There's ways that you make an API visible. In my case, stories, telling stories about query parameters. Who does that? I mean, it's only to make them visible, So making APIs visible is the difficult part, and people just don't see them. Like people still don't talk about their first party APIs. You rarely see people talk about their first party APIs and the ones they're building behind applications. And that was always my theatrical thing when I was consulting to go into groups is they would line up a meeting and I'd go, hey, do you have any, public API? Where's your portal? And I would ask them and, oh, we don't have any public APIs. That's why we're talking to you. And I would go download their mobile app and go to their website and I would reverse engineer and proxy that and then print out an open API and give it to them. And they're like, where'd you get this? I'm like, well, it's public. These are public APIs. Oh, no, no, no. These aren't public APIs. Yeah, they are. That's why I have them, and I've done these assessments for organizations, large enterprises and institutions, and scan their whole websites and bring them. Here's your inventory. And so people are dependent on this, are expanding it by the minute within these enterprises, and they're largely unaware that these pipes exist, and let alone have a conversation about how they're going to standardize them and evolve them.
Agreed, definitely agreed. One thing that you've spent more time in the enterprise world than me probably, but one thing that surprised me was the sheer volume of the APIs in your average enterprise. I think you even wrote an article about it where you tried to do some math around how many APIs per person that is. Coincidentally, like I said, we were doing this report. We were first and foremost pulling from our own data, but also we probably talked to more than like 150 companies in the last year, anywhere from mid-sized enterprises to large enterprises. On average, we saw at least 1,000 APIs, and in the financial, banking, insurance sector, we easily saw at least 5, even 10K APIs was the biggest number I've heard. I'm pretty sure you heard even more. And what fascinated me about that is something that you said is around 60% of those APIs were always classified as private or internal. Maybe like 30% of them partner, which was interesting, and only 10% were public. So kind of matches your view, and everybody always cared more about the public ones than the internal ones, because they felt like everybody can see the public ones, nobody knows about the internal ones, and then a guy like you comes in and reverse engineers everything. So it was a really interesting surprise. What about your math? Could you tell us a bit more about why the math around the number of employees and the number of APIs?
Yeah. Yeah. So I work on the Postman State of the API report while I work there. I help contribute to that. And then I've contributed to the Smart Bear one, the Rapid API. So I've been part of these reports, and I see waves come, and they come from different angles of, from security, from discovery, from observability, from quality, governance. And so I really want to understand what are the nuts and bolts across these reports, and what are the numbers that matter to executive leadership. That's ultimately what I'm getting at. And I'm trying to distill things down right now in terms they're going to care about. They want their staff to do 10x more. They want to be able to cut 10x and be more efficient. So how do you boil down things that you're doing with APIs that we're doing with governance, documentation, summaries, linting rules on status codes? What's the value of a status code being consistent? Like, how do you explain that? And that's hard. We just don't have those numbers, So I'm doing a lot of work, and I started with, well, how many APIs does an enterprise have? Well, it's a hard one, because what is an API? All right, HTTP API. I'm just going to define that. How many do they have? Well, it's hard. What is an API? Is it one operation, one path? All right. Well, it's a handful. It's a small to medium sized bounded context. That's an API. So how many does an enterprise have? And it very, as you said, depending on the industry, but really the size, as I found. So the number I came up with from everybody's reports, and my own talking to folks is 0.5 APIs per employee on your smaller end. Once you get up to the larger enterprises, there's 1 to 1.5 APIs per person that you have. And honestly, like, knowing all the enterprises I've known personally and intimately, I'm guessing it's probably 2 to 2.5. If you start counting first party APIs, microservices, and a lot of that stuff. So there's a lot of sprawl, and people just don't see it. And so I'm trying to quantify that. How much do you have? What's your inventory? What's the landscape look like? And then I also am doing some work on, well, what does it cost to connect, consume, integrate, and build applications on that.
That's such a very interesting statistic. So basically, if you have like 5,000 employees, you basically have 7,500 APIs. If you've got 10K employees, you've got 20,000 APIs, which is fascinating and truly speaks to the kind of sheer size of what these companies have been building for the past decade. And I'm assuming that it's just going to get even bigger with AI driving a lot of these things.
Amen.
Just to note something, Pratim, we've got like a couple of questions, so we'll get to the questions. We'll leave at least like 10 to 15 minutes. We'll read out all the questions and answer all the questions as soon as we wrap this up. We've got maybe like 4 more slides.
Can we take like this one question, because it's in the context, and I would like to know, like, Kin, when you mentioned first party APIs, I see Jennifer Riggins. Hi, Jennifer. Wants to know what do you mean by first party APIs?
Yeah, so the boundaries of internal, external, public, private, skew. It's hard to nail down how enterprises see it. It's very relative to how they do business. And then that's further skewed by domains, lines of businesses, tribal factions, which within an enterprise. But here's how I define things. So you have public APIs that are intended for third-party usage, meaning we're building this API, we're intentionally publishing it publicly for third-party people to consume. Now, that includes partners in my mind, but a lot of people will separate out third-party unknowns from trusted third parties. The same pool of people in my book. Your third publicly available third party intentional. It's the one that gets the most attention, but it's the smallest slice of the pie, um, unless you look at partners and stuff. The next is, hey, this is a public API. We're producing it and we're using it in our own web, mobile, desktop device and AI applications, but we're using it external to the firewall. Now, this is where you can get the most bang for your buck because you know what? Every piece of little bit of friction you're introducing into that pipeline, those are your own employees that you're slowing down and getting in the way. When they're third parties, it's easy to go, hey, they're over there, and that's their problem. We don't,
Yeah, we don't
we're
feel
not
it.
worried. Yeah, yeah. But these are your staff. And so that first party, meaning you're your own producer and consumer, and they're publicly available, and you're not talking about them, and they're shadow, they're hidden, they're not secured, they're not consistent. So that really is the low-hanging fruit for the type of services that Treblle offer when it comes to getting this house in order, quantifying it, defining it, eliminating redundancy, encouraging reuse, and consistency. And we haven't even touched on internal microservices and the notion that anything you produce today could be released externally or used in a first party or a third party app tomorrow. And so why is it just internal only? So
Yeah, great definition. First party basically used by your own employees, and then everybody else, I guess, gets on the third party list. A nice analogy.
I want to move towards the topic that Vedran just introduced is like everyone's talking about AI. We have new LLMs coming up every day. We have different new applications that we're talking to. And we all know that these are powered by APIs. And the more we grow ahead here, the more load our APIs will take, the more observability needs to come into picture to make sure that they just stay reliable and don't break in from time to time. What changes are we going to see when it comes to two parts? I'd like to know from Vedran and Kin, both of y'all, like in terms of tech side, on the API level, what changes would we see to make sure an API is like API AI ready, for example? And on the other side, what changes should we do to just make sure all the APIs are in line to the products that we are AI products that we are building?
yeah, and I'll preface this with saying, I'm not in the AI cheerleading camp, primarily because not as much to do with AI, but any application. I've long stayed out of mobile discussions, long stayed out of IoT and devices. IoT is going to change the world, and so I stay out of the last mile. I'm an interface guy. I know my lane and I stay in it. And so I look at purely the interface and what's going to need from a producer and consumer standpoint. And this is one area where stand by not much has changed because here are the things you're going to need is, I mean, you're going to need discoverability. You're going to need, quality of service. You're going to need all of that automated, standardized rate limiting and metering and billing. You're going to need semantics on top of that to know what API calls are which, and that's not anything new. We were doing JSON LD 2012, 13 heavily. JSON LDs everywhere, linked data if you're not familiar. Seeing resurgence in hypermedia conversations, HAL and Siren and all the hypermedias. Again, not anything new. Event driven, I stay within the webhooks realm of event driven, but event driven, not anything new. You're going to need a lot of that to power all of this. So really, for me, it's in the stack with web, desktop, mobile device, AI. You need consistent, clean, standardized, knowable, observable APIs, and then you'll have little nuances for each of those applications that'll have to be taken care of as part of your design.
As much as I agree with Kin that for APIs, not a lot will change. There are certain nuances that you need to do in order to get, if you want an LLM or an AI agent to easily understand your API documentation, you need to have a couple of things in there. But I think fundamentally, what's been happening in this space is rather fascinating. Like Kin said, not a lot will change technically, but I think a lot of the people that are building AI products don't know the basics of basically doing APIs, right? So it's like you skipped 5 grades of school and now you're like doing, I don't know, quantum mathematics, and you don't even know how to do basic algebra, right? So that's, I think, what's the most fascinating thing here is, and we come back to that education. I think a lot of APIs, when it comes to especially AI, there's a lot of folks don't do the bare minimum in securing their API and authorizing their API. So if you have a RAG AI model that can basically access some piece of information and you're not properly authorizing or checking permissions or something like that, that could lead to a major catastrophe. I mean, we've seen deals where basically you ask an AI chatbot on some kind of insurance website to basically give you the lowest
Yeah.
insurance possible. That could have easily been avoided by a simple API check, but nobody, people are not used to building APIs, and especially not used to building APIs in the context of AI. I think for us, one fascinating thing that we've observed is when we look at how the growth of APIs has been kind of going on. One fascinating thing is that we've noticed is, like I said, around 807% more AI-based APIs were launched in 2024 when we compare the data from 2023. And we're going to talk about security and a lot of different stuff, but that's a huge number of APIs. And maybe can you have a better term, but a lot of these APIs are proxy APIs, meaning they don't actually do a lot of things except take a request, forward it to one of the LLMs, and maybe attach some context to it
Okay.
in the form of a document or a piece of text, right? So these people are not building your traditional APIs for heavy production use. They're actually building something that'll just get the job done, right? But eventually they will have to. What do you think about that, Kim?
Yeah, a couple interesting things, and I like how you guys keep referencing education, because education is really a key piece of this. It's less about security, less about AI, and it's about people don't know HTTP and understand basic auth, JWT, and OAuth, and most people don't know what a header is. I get so much pushback from developers on rules and policies associated with headers. Oh yeah, we don't really see headers. We don't really know about them. I'm like, so tell me your background. It's like, oh, I got my PhD in computer science, and I came out of, an Ivy League school not knowing about HTTP headers. And
Yeah.
so like there's some fundamental problems. And ironically, when AI is going after education, you start seeing the full cycle of why these things are the way they are, because people are coming out of schools learning vendors and not learning patterns and protocols and standards. So there's a lot of fundamental issues going on here, but I'm glad you guys talk about the education piece, because how do you, through tooling and through the services that we use, how do you bring, this is that visibility. How do you see APIs? How do you see headers? How do you make it so you're not afraid of headers and understand? And so you have more observability and traceability, and those aren't just kind of dummy proxy pass-throughs and no accountability. And, the number of, first thing with an API, when I do an API review, I'm like, who's the owner of this API? It's like, not me, not me. I don't know. I was given it. I was just, like no one owns these APIs. There's no accountability. So people are just connecting the dots and hoping it plays out in a good way.
Great choice of words. Definitely something we see and hear a lot. Definitely, yeah. But that's essentially, I think, one of the reasons why there isn't that top of the funnel. I'm using sales words, but it's a nice word. Top of the funnel awareness about APIs is because most of, if you ask an average person, they've never seen an API request. Most developers don't actually ever see the API requests flowing from their customers, consumers to their APIs. And this is where I think, like I said, we're doing our part there, but essentially enabling the full observability of that API, including request response data, so you know what people are sending on your API, you know how your API is behaving, especially if in the context of AI. But maybe we can talk about that a bit more later. I see Pratim has already switched us to another topic.
I have, but what I hear from you and Kin, what the way I have made a conclusion out of it is education is needed on both sides and at different scales, on a developer level, on a small scale where it's an individual understanding of the tech part, and on the enterprise level also there is education required to discover and make sure all the policies and documentation is right, so that both of them work together and don't create more gaps. So basically we are looking at a best case scenario where there is a single way of education for developers and enterprises to work together and have basically a dashboard or anywhere where both of them can get value for something that they are working together. That's a good way to keep everyone in sync. Is that a conclusion that I can take from here?
Yeah, I would support that. I mean, that's the key of, or the importance of dashboards and visibility brought by, companies like Treblle, making the pipes visible so you can see the requests and see the responses. But that's why I emphasize, your guys' focus on education is so key.
Yeah.
No one's got time to do that early on. Everyone's doing, having to do more with less. Everyone's busy. 5-10% of people are going to go read the docs, going to go take the training course. Everybody else is just going to run towards production. And if the dashboards aren't, stop pausing people in for a second to teach them, hey, what is this rate limit header? Why does it matter? Those types of things, it ain't gonna happen. And so every request, response, every error, every status code, everything in API operations is a teachable moment and it has to be kind of treated like that. And I think, that's one area with governance that I really see as being important in that next expansion is we have to educate the workforces in motion, and the engineering as well as the product folks. Translate why a status code matters to a product manager and give me a dashboard and a place to understand that importance. That's what's got to happen.
Interesting. Nice observations.
Absolutely. And tying this all back to the point that these gaps in education is what is making the bar of API security low and lower. This is something that we saw with the report as well, that 52% of the requests have literally no authentication. And we're seeing people not follow encryption algorithms or even make sure that basic masking of security data is not forwarded, and all of this area. So is these education gaps causing a low bar for API security, or is it because APIs are looked at as complex that we're missing out on API security? Why are we seeing this decrease in API security as we are going ahead, as we are actually learning so much more? Like in 15 years, why is security degraded and not gotten better?
Yeah, it's everyone's, it's all those business reasons I talked about, productivity, efficiency. We got to move fast. We got to be competitive. What's the first to go in that environment is training and classes, and people leave at, you leave university, you get dumped into this, you stop learning, I mean, you learn new frameworks and new tactical things, but you don't really pay attention to those bigger things. And we talk about shift left in the space. You hear that a lot is, hey, we got to shift this further left, but without education and training and resources, you're just piling on more work. You're making developers do design work. You're making, so, and then you got business folk who are caught up in this as well. They're being same thing, and they don't even have the fundamentals that maybe some developers or engineering have. And used to make a lot of money doing low hanging fruit, as I called it, where I would scan an enterprise, and I did this for government agencies and others, and tell them where to start with their APIs. And I did the University of Oklahoma one time. And so every CSV, every spreadsheet, every form, every API I put into a single inventory of APIs JSON, and I give it to the person that asked me to do it. And here's where you should start. All these forms, all these spreadsheets should be APIs, and they should be readily available. And I didn't hear back from them for a couple of weeks. And then about a month or two later, I got a call from IT, and they said, "Hey, tell us your story. What happened here?" And I told them, and they said, "Okay, well, when we first got your report, and I published it to a public GitHub repo, which may have not been the smartest idea. They said we scanned it, and there was all of these PII, accounting spreadsheets, different things. So engineers were exposing data to go, oh, hey, you need that CSV in another group. We'll just publicly publish it to a URL. Here you go." And then business people were doing it with spreadsheets, and there was all this data just published, and I just happened to crawl the site and make an inventory of it. And so they said, "Yeah, we almost called the FBI on you, but we realized why you did this, and you told the story around it, so we actually understood. You wrote a blog post about it. Can you take the GitHub repo down and the blog post down?" And so, this is the current state of enterprises. And yeah, it's education. Yeah, it's austerity. It's having to do more with less. It's if you just could pause for a little bit and give people more education, you'd be better off, but you can't. That's just the reality of it.
I agree. Education plays a huge role. Nobody was learned to, build good APIs. But I think another factor that we see a lot is, two pathways. Usually, a lot of teams, a lot of APIs start by call them first party or private APIs, and their engineers feel like there's not a big need for security, right? Why would we add auth when we're the only ones using it and nobody can access it from the internet, right? Or something like that. And then, maybe a business case comes in and somebody says, hey, we could make money on this API if we sell it to a partner or somebody, and then they expose the API to a partner without actually implementing the basics of security, right? So that's one area, one path where we see, a lot of problems start happening. And this is, I definitely agree with Kin saying shift left and start earlier. A second part would be that a lot of tooling isn't focused on runtime. I fundamentally believe that when it comes to APIs, you can't actually do security without observability, meaning it's like having a camera that only turns on sometimes versus all the time, right? And if you don't have access to that runtime data, it's literally impossible to do security. And maybe like a third avenue that we've seen, I don't think the real decision makers and people who are paid to worry and paid to take care of some of these things actually know and see what the security status is. I think a lot of people in enterprise companies blindly trust engineers that they've done a really good job without actually having Kin says it, dashboards and access to information. You can't actually assess what is actually going on. So I think those are like four that we've noticed when we talk to customers, when we onboard new customers. And by the way, maybe one mention, the data that we're talking about today, generally, we handle about 2.5 billion API requests per month. We took a randomized sample of 1 billion requests. So everything we talk about today is actually based on real data from, anonymized sources.
Yeah, I totally agree. The last point about business leadership not realizing, I think that's the area we've got to invest right now. That's what I'm really focused on, is closing that divide, because the people who worry about this don't know that all the developers are like, back to the electricity analogy, running space heaters in their bedrooms, with clothes hanging over the top of it, and they can't see any of that. you know?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. To them, it's all dirty work. I feel like a lot of it seems like there's a theme of basically APIs being this, thing in the shadow, and maybe sometimes they come out of the shadows, but essentially, we need to do a lot more, both from education, tooling, and awareness to make sure that they're front and center as they deserve.
Yeah.
I want to understand from both your experiences when we are talking about normal products where it's not the backend is not they're not an API first product, they're a complete application, and then we compare it with API first products. Is security better for API first products who are literally out there to sell APIs, or is it? Have you seen bet? I am hoping and I'm guessing, has there been better education when it's an API based product, or is it the same everywhere, or how do we see that comparison?
I mean, yeah, with an API, when you're API first, you tend to have more of those common platformatized, hey, we've got someone who's thought through auth, and they're probably pushing away from basic auth. They're probably only using keys in simple areas. They probably got a more sophisticated JWT or OAuth. So someone's done that thinking in an API first or a platform kind of shared scenario. So that you think more about the cross-cutting issues, and when you're prioritizing, I think we need to rebrand API first. I like the phrase. I've used it for years, but I feel like it distracts somewhat from what the cross-cutting, the things that they care about. It's almost like, hey, that thing you care about, we don't care about it. You should care about our APIs. It's where we should be like, hey, these things you're having to care about that you don't know anything about, we're going to worry about that for you, and you shouldn't have to worry about it. It just needs to be phrased differently, I think. So,
I think from everything that I saw and by this point, and when we jump on a call with an enterprise company, I can tell we can spot maturity of where this conversation is gonna go by who's on the call.
yeah.
Usually, when you have basically somebody that's in like technical product management or something like that on the call, means that this is gonna be a better API. Means somebody hopefully thought about some of the aspects of the API, including security. So I would roughly say that basically, if you are building an API as a product or on a API first companies, we've generally seen better quality APIs across the board, because like Ken said multiple times, like the objective of an engineer, and I don't think this is anything wrong. Like the engineer's job isn't to learn how to design a great. I mean, everybody should, but generally, we should separate out engineering from designing APIs, securing APIs, understanding them, understanding the relationship between consumers and producers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I so we can conclude that if products or companies or technologies just start looking at themselves as API first, at the behest of, again, using the same terminology, Kin, why, even if they are not, that would take us towards having more secure applications and more secure ways of making sure that we don't have such low bar for security in the API enterprise world.
Yeah, just declaring API first is all about you're prioritizing APIs. And that means you're looking across APIs. And so immediately, just by doing that, you're not just down in the weeds on one API. You're elevating yourself up. We're looking across. So auth, observability, traceability, rate limiting, all these monetization revenues, reporting, analytics, all those things become evident where you're down and you're producing one API. It's like, what's my sprint? What am I doing? You're down in the weeds. So just declaring API first is a first start.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I think that makes more sense to
If
just
I
think,
may
yeah.
add, we had a great we worked with Claire Barrett. She's an amazing woman in APIs. She has a lot of insights similar to Kin in working with APIs. And I think one of the fundamental things that you want to do in order to transform your org into an API first, or at least think about APIs a bit differently and more seriously, is a lot of people are afraid to invest because they don't know what they're investing in. Again, nobody sees a lot of these things. Nobody knows what the output is. You can't measure it. It's very hard. The tools that generally exist to understand APIs are basically built for people who, spend their nights alone in basements and figure things out in like really archaic ways. So I think fundamentally, investing in API initiatives is a really good starting point. And again, she wrote a book for us called Getting Results from API Investments. You can find it on our website. But basically, you can go there and understand how you can go from zero to having a much more serious API program. And I know you can find something similar on Kin's blog, where basically even we've read some of the materials that you wrote on basically how to get an API program or initiatives up and running.
Claire is very top down, so she's going to help you figure it from a executive leadership, product owner. She speaks in normal language. I can still get you there, get you to the top, but I'm coming bottom up. I'm definitely more technical.
Whenever I speak next to Claire, I'm like, I think of myself as a pretty smart guy. Whenever I'm next to her, I'm like, are we even in the same space? But yeah, she's really good at helping you understand the top level executive mindset when it comes to APIs and how to move that needle in the direction that you need to build an API program.
Great.
We are at the last stage of our discussion. Like I think we've covered starting from the scale of APIs to security, observability, and how these things look different on an enterprise level, on a developer level. Now, Kin, I am not aware of what is your favorite language to build APIs in, but this is what this year's report mentioned about language-based scores and how they look. So would love to first know what's your favorite language to build backend systems in, so that I know if we can be friends or no.
So with APIs, like I said, I'm an interface guy. So I actually don't pick a language, a favorite language for that reason, because I'm agnostic and I come from, I was a COBOL programmer to .NET to PHP to JavaScript, and then Python. I love Python. I love me some Go. I don't get all nerdy about Haskell or Rust as much as other people, but I similar to AI, mobile, IoT. I stay at the interface level. I believe stay agnostic to the language. I like running in different serverless and cloud environments, so I can choose to run Python or Go if I want to. Node and JavaScript is so easy and so trashy and so great. And it's the reason why you're seeing this slide is because it's just easy and there's a lot out there that you can do, and you can move real fast, real quick, but you can also get yourself in a whole world of hurt real quick.
Absolutely. This is what we noticed, and we've been talking to a lot of JavaScript people and the community people about why. I have been calls with my friends who are JavaScript experts and different framework experts, and they all concur whenever I ask them, this is what we found out, and why do you think so is? And the first response, to put it in very good words, they do say, because it's trashy and it's very easy, but I'd like to put it in a very, in a bed, package it well, saying that there's so much to do in JavaScript and there are so many different ways to do a single thing that it causes more scope for just gaps in performance. Yeah. That's what I have heard. Vedran, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we actually noticed this. So this is our second year running the report. We actually saw this last year. It was even worse, but I was afraid to, it was our second year as a company. I didn't want the whole internet hating me because the vast majority of I'm going to say developers or JavaScript developers, but this year it kind of repeated itself again. And, I didn't want to ignore it anymore. My theory here is basically this, right? I think that, and this comes back to REST not being a standard and some of these things. And this is, I think, JavaScript is a very open-ended language, right? And I think the predominant use case wasn't necessarily building good architectures and backend systems, right? It was more about front-end, right? So how can we build front-end experiences? So if you come from that legacy, you basically have engineers who are used to and trained at building front-end apps, experiences on the web, et cetera, et cetera. Now people are pushing this, and now you've got people who are doing JavaScript building mobile apps, which again, I think is completely wrong because, there are different aspects of mobile apps and what a mobile app is, native apps, as well as APIs. I think fundamentally, if you're serious about, an API, you shouldn't be doing it in JavaScript. There are probably rare exceptions why you might, but I think I would definitely, not be my language of choice. Like we see a lot of, for example, in really true enterprises, we see a lot of Java, we see a lot of .NET. These languages are just much more structured, right? So you can't do the crazy things that you can do with a JavaScript API. You can't go that much out of the box. And I think if you really want to build some really good APIs, you need some of that structure to put you back into place when you try to, I don't know, do crazy stuff. But to me, I'm a PHP guy, so I'm glad Kin you at least tried PHP. So I come from a PHP background. Go ahead.
No, PHP, I was a WordPress guy and PHP
There you
and
go.
for a
I
lot
I
of years. Yeah,
I
I
started.
did some really bad stuff with PHP and I loved it. You know,
I did some really bad stuff with PHP as well, but it got better. It got more structured, especially with frameworks like Laravel, and they were overall the best winner. And I think fundamentally the reason why they did is because they simply have a bunch of built-in best practices, where as soon as you install the framework, you won't be able to do as stupid or crazy things like you would with a relatively free PHP app. I think one exception I will note with the JavaScript world, because I feel like I have to. There is a framework called Adonis.js. Again, I don't want to plug anybody, but they did score radically better, actually closer to Laravel. So I think it was like around 60. But again, the reason why they did, why it did so well is because it's a framework, right? So they put you in some kind of a lane, like Ken likes to say, and you're in that lane and you can't go left, not very easily go left and right and crash into something else. But one thing that always fascinated me, and maybe this is a perfect guy to ask, is when we look at industries like people who actually build the best APIs, we found that management consulting by far outperforms everybody when it comes to the quality of the API, followed by IT and finance. And this reminded me of Yukin. So I'm assuming when you go, do you help organizations fix some of these API problems, or how do you work with them?
yeah, I mean, I try to focus on, I'm a one person show, so there's only so much I can do. And so I try to help folks think about the high level governance all the way down to the rules. How do you apply the rules? How do you do it? But I want to build internal capacity. I'm not gonna sell you a tool. I'm gonna help you understand, I'm gonna help with that education part and really help you build that capacity either through self-service materials or me coming in and actually helping you do it. Or just reading my blog and being able to grab it for free. So that's kind of the spectrum that I work with. So yeah, consultant, I would say, is helping people think through their wider operations. But the storytelling piece and the evangelism is what I enjoy the most.
Cool.
Well, we are in the last few minutes, and I would really love us to cover the questions that are there in the chat section. We already covered what are first-party APIs, but we have another question where it's for Kin and Vedran to comment. It seems like artificial intelligence is once again expanding the surface area of our enterprise tech debt. How can enterprises tackle this problem? Are they even aware they need to tackle it?
Ken, you want to start, and then I'll have my opinion.
I mean, I'll, echo similar what I said before is, yeah, it's another application adding to the stack. We're creating APIs, we're consuming APIs to power it. It's expanded that stack, but my advice is the same. That's what I mean when I say not a lot has changed is just get your API house in order, get your centralized resources, education, observability, governance, get all those things centralized and still allow, you can do it in a federated way, so teams can keep their agency and autonomy, but and you're gonna do all right. I mean, and you're gonna deal with whatever wave comes next, whether it's next gen AI or it's something else. There's always something that's gonna come. So, I've ridden the desktop, the web, the mobile, the device, the AI. I mean, there was several other bot and kind of voice waves, smaller waves. So it's all just building towards, the cloud was big, social was big, commerce was big. There's always something that comes along. And as long as you have your API house in order, your schema in order, you have your pipelines and your life cycles and common vocabulary, and you can observe it, you can see it, you're going to be all right. You're going to be adaptable and figure out whatever comes along.
You make it sound so easy. I'm gonna try to make it a bit more complicated, but essentially, I understand that everybody wants to keep up with the pace. Is AI so far has been a rapidly evolving, or at least a rapidly reported involving space. So I understand that everybody wants to kind of run, which is fine. But you can only run as fast as how good your shoes are, right? And I think in this analogy, your APIs are kind of like your shoes. So first and foremost, you got to start understanding and taking account of what you have, like Ken said, and that starts, in my opinion, with tooling. Without actually being able to understand what is going on your API on a request basis, on a governance basis, across different teams. This is I think, most important thing that we also kind of talk to our customers a lot is, enable your product team to enable your QA team to see, enable your consumers to actually see what is it that they're going on, and together with them, you're going to be able to get to a place where you can actually have a better API and a much better API program. Because at the end of the day, can keep saying that nothing has changed, which is absolutely true, right? The whole idea of APIs has been the same for like decades, right? They're essentially there to enable things like AI, enable things like IoT just by plugging in an LLM model to your API. You should be able to do it. But the problem is, people have like building these APIs willy-nilly, and this is where we're in a phase where now they're becoming more important. And I think the only way you rectify that is you take account of what you have, figure out what you need to fix, what you don't need to fix. But first and foremost, you need visibility yesterday, right? Because without visibility across the org, nothing's going to change.
And if you don't do it now, you're not going to have it for the next wave of whatever.
Exactly.
Well, we'll be here no matter what wave comes in next. But we are in the last. We are
One
over time.
more, I think. Right?
Yes. The question is, API as a product is what everyone is building. So any design pattern change or suggestions for developer experience you folks have? Kin, would you like to share something on this?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot there. So productization, treating APIs as a product, and then the whole developer experience. So consumers being able to onboard, feedback loops, communication with them when changes happen. And so really it all comes down to, that observability, traceability, and how, shifting left, having, API first, prioritizing your auth, all those things that it's just going to be a lot less friction for those consumers. And so that experience, finding it, the documentation's complete, playing and learning about it before they build with it, the sandbox and onboarding is going to be a delightful experience. And then once you actually get approved and into production, the API is not changing. You're not breaking things for that consumer. And so making sure you just can see those APIs and they're observable and they're consistent. When I want to use that second API, it doesn't have a different status code. It doesn't, it's not going to be radically different. It's comfortable, just like that last one I used. And if you don't have that platform in place, that experience is just going to suffer. So
Absolutely.
Great. I've been publishing content around how to build like really good REST-based APIs. I think you can find it on our blog. There are multiple different videos on our YouTube page where you can actually go in and actually understand from a engineering perspective on how to do it, and from a design perspective on how to do it. I think one thing that I've noticed is, and I feel like everybody's gonna be afraid to say it, but I think Kin randomly said at the beginning, nobody reads. Like a lot of people focus a lot of time on API documentation and providing like a lot of information there. The reality is nobody cares. Like, just give me an OpenAPI spec file and I'll do the rest on my own. I think this is the first application of AI where I was really excited about. We built this AI assistant, Alfred, and you give Alfred basically, you can embed Alfred onto any developer portal, and Alfred can essentially understand your API documentation, and you can ask it a question. Hey, generate the integration code for this endpoint in, I don't know, Laravel or Go or whatever, and Alfred can do it. So you can use some of these modern technologies to basically change the way that the developer experience, both internally and externally, is. And I think, again, we also offer some tooling around this, but giving even third-party developers, especially your own internal developers, the ability to see is, you wouldn't believe how powerful that is. If a developer can see an API request, the data they send, the responses that they're getting back, 95 to 98% of the time, they can self-service any problem they have. You don't have to spend time on technical support. You don't have to go to QA at all. They can figure it out themselves. If you did the work, like Ken said, if you return the proper response code, if you return JSON, all of that can be figured out.
Absolutely.
I think go ahead.
I think we will now wrap up. We are beyond our time, and really thankful for Kin. I know we have another question, but probably this is the question we can take in the next webinar that we have coming up. Thank you so much, Ken, for being here. And it was lovely chatting to you, learning more from you. We would love to see more of you and meet you in person soon, somewhere in the US, or whenever you're in Amsterdam, Croatia, or anywhere across. I think we'll someday soon cross paths. And thank you everyone for being here. I've seen that most of the people who've joined have been there since the start. If you want to know anything more, feel free to check out Treblle on treblle.com. And I have shared Kin and Vedran's details on the screen, so you can always look them up. And yeah, have a great evening. Thank you, Vedran, as well, for being here and being so helpful with the whole webinar. And see you again in another one, I guess.
Thank you both, Kin and Pratim. It was really an amazing, one of the better webinars I was on, and hopefully everybody else learned something new.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.